Hello and welcome to part 5 of a critique of Outlast. Let's get right on with it, shall we? Now, as I've been saying, there are significant sequences of gameplay throughout Outlast, and I've been trying to go through them and reduce them down to what you are required to do, stripping it of other aspects because it proves certain things about the construction of the game itself. Once you collect those 3 fuses we were talking about, you'll find yourself being ambushed by this kind man pictured here. I hate this man. He represents to me a lot of what's wrong with this game. I didn't know that this guy suddenly becomes hostile. First of all, he very nonchalantly opens the door. I think if the game Outlast wants to introduce an enemy suddenly at the point of completing a puzzle, they may want to spring him on you instead of having him slowly open the door respectfully. The music just cranks like fuck the moment the door behind him closes. Is this on purpose? Did they want those two events to link up? Because it comes across as like really forced, like, hey, you're in trouble. Watch how stiffly he'll turn, how set onto rails his movements are. It is very bloody distracting. He has several madman screams and yells while moving almost like he's just having a normal day. Now, the everyman may or may not notice this, since it is oddly specific, but it is why I can never take these guys seriously. What part of him even looks remotely like this series of screams and yells are actually coming out of him? It's the mouth, at most. His head, for the most part, seems pretty calm. His eyes, arms, shoulders, etc. all feel very normal and fine, but his mouth and voice are going nuts. I harped on about this before, but this sends completely confusing signals to me, and as a breakneck decision, I was genuinely confused on what the hell was about to happen. Not to mention that he apparently got so confused he thought I was behind him, and he just does a little turn. Combine all these things and you have a crappy set piece cobbled together to give a quick spook to the player, which, to be perfectly honest, really does describe this whole game. We're probably going to return to this guy, so don't forget about him. Next up was one of my more memorable bits in Outlast. They take away the camera and you are forced to traverse the world without the use of night vision, so no safety net. This means they had to be more careful with the lighting to ensure that you could get from A to B, but from a gameplay standpoint this is pretty much just very simplistic. You could literally collect the camera after following a one-way path and then come back the same way. There is far more to discuss here in terms of atmosphere. Overall though, it is really sad that one of the moments that sticks out in my mind as an interesting piece of gameplay was when they had taken the established mechanic away from me. I feel like that should never result in a highlight of the game, yet here we are. The idea of breaking the monotony in a game by reducing your options is a little bizarre, but that's how entrenched the sequences get in this game. And that's not to say it's completely out of the ordinary. If you have a game that gives you lots of weaponry and then takes it away from you, that would be a notable sequence. I just wish Outlast did more with this idea. Now, not to be cruel to the game, but that's it. We only have several of the same sequences left. All of them are established in a way that there is an enemy in the room and you have to run from the enemy, all the while getting closer to the priest and then down to the facility below. I'm not underselling it, that is literally what's left. It is once again extremely linear, and it is the same gameplay we've seen pretty much throughout the entire game already, and it was peaked all the way back with Traeger. The running from the wall rider literally has no value as gameplay aside from whatever the player can concoct at this point in terms of scares. A lot of things fall apart as you progress for the gameplay. You will find yourself getting bored and hiding in lockers because the AI react in the same way each time, which is essentially a ticking timer until you are free, so naturally many players will simply risk it and run away, since that would be far more exhilarating by comparison to doing the same thing again and again. You may find exploits like walking into a locker while you've been spotted, only to walk right back out the second someone tries to open it, giving you a strong head start on escaping them. Not to mention that if you simply figure out you can get past any enemy by closing a door and waiting on the other side, and then running through once they break through, all of the chase sequences are relatively easy to manipulate. And then there's the whole shimmy walls represent safety, and the game has clear moments of non-gameplay that'll pretty much tell you nothing is going to happen. Okay, look at it this way. You can sum up Outlast gameplay sections like this. Watch and see what you think. Avoid a big dude and go to a place. Avoid a dude and hit 4 switches and go to a place. Avoid 2 dudes and hit a switch and go to a place. Avoid 2 dudes and go to a place. Avoid a big dude and go to a place. Avoid a big dude and go to a place. Avoid a big dude and turn 2 valves and go to a place. Avoid a big dude and go to a place. Avoid a dude and go to a place. Avoid 5 dudes and go to a place. Avoid a dude and collect a key to go to a place. Avoid a big dude and hit 3 switches to go to a place. Avoid 2 dudes and go to a place. Avoid 2 dudes and collect 4 keys and go to a place, and then avoid another dude. Avoid 2 dudes and go to a place. Collect your camera, avoid 3 dudes and go to a place. Avoid a big dude and go to a place. Avoid 2 dudes and go to a place. Avoid a big dude and go to a place. Avoid a dude and go to a place. Avoid a dude and hit 3 switches and watch the cutscene. In between this, you will soak in the atmosphere, and you will have stretches of nothing or minor enemies that are slow and serve to remind you that you are playing a game. This should highlight a very strong gameplay issue to you, but for the sake of being fair, you guys are fully aware that I love Amnesia for its choices in design, so let's apply the exact same reductive description to the game as well. Collect 4 potions and combine them, then go to a place. Avoid 2 dudes and go to a place. Collect 3 parts to fix an elevator by solving logic and mathematical puzzles while avoiding 3 dudes. Avoid multiple dudes and create a key to go to a place. Create an anti-poison jab by collecting certain tools, solve a series of logic puzzles, and perform some simple platforming to turn 3 valves and go to a place and escape 2 dudes once completing 2 of these tasks. Solve a logic puzzle and then escape 2 dudes and go to a place. Avoid several dudes while finding 6 pieces of a puzzle and bind them with an agent while also breaking a machine by throwing objects at it. Choose from 4 possible endings based on your own actions and watch the cutscene. In between this, you will soak in the atmosphere and Alexander will commentate your journey and you will understand more from your character about his arc as flashbacks play. This is blatant. Outlast doesn't have much of any varying gameplay to speak of. It's all running around or walking around with the occasional key with the skin of a classic metal key or a key card or a button or a valve or switch, and it's all simply meant to drag the player from one end of the room and back again while dropping a monster in between all of it. The difference with Outlast compared to the games I think are fantastic is that it front loads all of the big scares and lacks any kind of meaningful story or meaningful mechanics. So you have to literally squeeze the remaining atmosphere out with whatever you have left to play with. They don't test anything from you aside from your running away abilities. Your brain is left to rot as you go through this game, and you aren't provided a sense of progression, only the same routine but sometimes a little bit more interesting or far less interesting as you go. I think people hate the ending of Outlast in general because it's all so dull at that point. Imagine if the game were twice as long, and it was just more random insane people, more keys, more things that arbitrarily have you bouncing around until you can simply kill the primary antagonist. Because that's all this is. It's just busy work to delay the ever-shrinking story, which is that of a guy who happens to be in a place where everything's gone to shit, and needs to go and turn off the enemy downstairs. I don't know why people find it engaging when it's the same bloody thing over and over and over again. This came out after Amnesia. After. How did they reduce their game to one gameplay element out of several that Amnesia used? And Amnesia is still referred to as repetitive. Okay, I think I've made my point pretty clear, but we must soldier on, and we will be referencing this as we continue since there are more things for me to show you. But yes, it is no secret I love the horror genre, especially in games, but I am not a fan of Outlast. However, I think it's more important for me to try and show you why rather than just say it, so let's continue. So we've covered this already, right? In mechanics? Well, I want to shine a bit more of a spotlight on the whole thing. The parkour mechanics amount to being able to cling to edges and climb up, jumping to these ledges, jumping across gaps and vaulting over obstacles. Very basic, but still very good for the setup of being chased. It adds a slightly more interesting element than simply running in a game like this. There is more of a connection to it than simply running because it stimulates what you would do in real life, or at the very least what you would do in a place if you were in this scenario. The very opening of the game gives you what is almost the entire experience right there on the scaffolding, like a little park for you to train in. You only have one way to go, and you learn that there is a feeling of it being a little bit clunky, but it's not like it's used all the time, so you probably doubt it would be much of a problem. Never mind that, it's bloody used all the time, and yes, it does feel clunky as hell. In many moments during the game, there will be times where players will shrug it off as their own fuck-up, but in Outlast, you will literally need to be in the correct positions for certain things to register. The ability to vault or jump over things is a snap requirement. It'll snap into place, and demand that you hit the button when in a certain position and facing a certain way, or you'll perform a pitiful jump and waste more time for the attacker to utilize. You essentially begin throwing your body at the obstacle, because it doesn't work consistently, or at least in a way that you would expect. You can't jump over any part of an obstacle, you have to jump over the center. But why don't we see what reviewers are saying about this?
Platforming akin to Mirror's Edge.
Something very similar to that featured in Mirror's Edge.
It's like a scary version of Mirror's Edge.
Now, I'm one of the rare people in the world that didn't find Mirror's Edge to be all that special. I appreciate the game all the same, I just didn't find it particularly satisfying myself. And that is fine, but please stop insulting the mechanics in Mirror's Edge like you are doing right now. Outlast is nowhere near the level that Mirror's Edge is, and I think that that is precisely because the game has a standard amount of parkour and is clunky at best. You'll find yourself getting stuck in shit because they didn't account for how you could change from crouch to prone during your time under a bed. Or how about the consistent way you'll be stuck on enemies with no options to escape or get around them? I think the fact that I literally got stuck on some raised ground should be enough to prove somewhat of a point here, but overall the fact is that the hitboxes for the parkour are just not smooth enough, and it spoils the effect for those who aren't accustomed to it. It is a serviceable mechanical set, but it is by no means something that is legendary about the game, and besides, it is pretty much entirely limited for the few things that we experience in the opening. This applies to the door mechanics too. They don't always close on command. They need to be in a particular position for this to happen as well. While I was recording offline, you can hear me tapping my mouse click trying to get the door closed, but I got nothing, and resorted to crouching next to it, which led to me being noticed. The doors don't always shut in a way you intend, but there is a strong borderline in how the door will react to you. You have to be within this borderline or the doors will not behave like doors at all. And besides, it's not strange to anyone that in this game you are literally faster than like everyone, including the wall rider. You can outpace pretty much everyone in the game. As a direct comparison, in Amnesia the enemies had different running speeds, and if you spent too long fucking around with them, they would gain a speed that was far faster than yours. This is clever. Outlast, however, allows you to always outrun the enemies, which, yeah, I don't know. That's a lot less scary once you realize it. You can always outrun them. You can even take a hit from them to be able to go back all of the way that you just ran. Oh, and by the way, as much as I agree that the bloody footprints are really cool as a small thing about the movement around the world, it doesn't always work. You can paint your booties up with a load of blood, but it just sometimes just doesn't work. Though there are other things I really do like. As I said, the whole looking back thing is pretty awesome as an addition, and when you're moving these blockages out of the way, you'll find that what you get is just enough view to see down the hole you came from, so if someone's chasing you, you'll get a narrow view of them, which can be quite scary. Now, I don't want to give the wrong impression. I think the parkour aspect is fine and it serves its purpose, but let's be fair, this is one of the only defining things about Outlast. It is a huge reason why the game has any sense of individuality, along with the night vision and its gratuitous nature. So for a defining feature, I'm sure you can agree that it isn't a very fleshed out one at all. Regardless, let's move on. Lighting in Outlast is fantastic. It hits you from the get-go that this place has been created to have some really interesting effects with lighting in mind. They have light sources placed realistically that spill onto the surrounding ground and walls, reflecting off blood and shiny tiles very effectively. It gives the impression that everything is very subject to destruction and that you really are viewing many of the areas at the moment of its downfall or during. This naturally creates some extremely strong shadows that give the impending darkness a lot more of a visual presence, especially in how much they can change at any moment. I think you guys probably understand and mostly agree with what I just said, but I guess I could have said dynamic lighting, right? Like I could have just said that Outlast has dynamic lighting. The reason I didn't is because dynamic lighting doesn't mean anything. Anyone who says that would likely be thinking of one thing and their audience would be left to think of anything they want.
The dynamic lighting.
Dynamic lighting.
It will often genuinely feel as though these people all have the same bloody script. The reason I have an issue with the phrase dynamic lighting is because it barely describes anything beyond light that moves and changes. Which bugs me because pretty much every source of light in video games can change. Every source of light can be manipulated. I guess there's an argument to be made that Outlast does it more, but that would be too difficult to explain in a review, of course. But yeah, the lighting is pretty awesome and it is easily one of the strengths that hold up the atmosphere. So from this, I would say that it is clear that the developers wanted light to play a huge part in Outlast. They wanted it to be scarce and manageable, very similarly to Amnesia. They wanted you to make hard decisions in relation to it. The night vision can work extremely well to exemplify the environment in a horrifying way. The green view brings everything to a sharp and imposing position in frame, making you feel like you're in an unfamiliar world where anything could happen. But how do you power this night vision? Batteries, of course. Collecting batteries has a very straightforward, satisfying and rewarding angle to them. Considering that they are the only resource that depletes as you move forward in the game, it feels good to be on top of your batteries, in that it is a sort of safety net, so the more you have, the more you feel as though you are performing well. The other obvious benefit of this is that it will have you exploring the world in general, looking in nooks and crannies, which will naturally extend the game time and help players absorb what would have been a more realized world. On top of that, they give the batteries a solid shine, so collecting them is a straightforward and eye-catching thing that makes you sort of go, oh, there's one. The night vision mechanic as a premise is a great setup to scare the player. It is well utilized for what it is. Similarly to hide and seek gameplay, it is maxed out for what it is. However, they weren't highly creative with it. The premise alone was enough to carry the game, but there was a chance to really mess with certain puzzle elements or perhaps have alternate filters on the camera besides a standard night vision mode. What I am describing would be a very different game entirely, but I think it would have been a better one. More options, more variety, more planning, since there's only so many times you can be chased before it becomes played out. Also, I know this is a nitpick, but it never sat right with me that Miles just shoves the battery into the camera, as if he is really reloading a gun. There is no opening the slot or anything, and I know this is just because you need it to be quick, but it was distracting. Almost as distracting as having a camera that eats batteries extremely fast. Like, what camera does this? It is the most inefficient use of power for a camera in history. I understand that you have to mediate the mechanics somehow. They had to prevent the player from having infinite light sources, but also have the light source be reloadable or refillable, like Amnesia, which would be batteries. The mediation of batteries has resulted in a completely unrealistic system that honestly could have been better realized. As a direct result of this series of choices, we now have to place batteries all around the asylum. The first battery is sitting on some papers, which is pretty much fine, I guess, though why would it be there? We get the old, there's a radio next to this battery, meaning that's where the battery came from. Why is it out of the socket, and why is there a radio here anyway? Wait, this is the cell of one of those patients at the asylum, an asylum that is confirmed to be over-the-top torturous to its inhabitants. Why would they be given that? They could potentially use it as a weapon or manipulate the smaller pieces of metal to try and escape, or hell, they could literally swallow the smaller parts and kill themselves. They attempt to make these placements realistic, but now when you think about it, it becomes completely unrealistic. Like literally, there's just a battery near a chalkboard. Why? They plot batteries next to the corpses a lot to try and imply that maybe the guard was changing the battery at the moment of death, I guess, and he was incredibly unlucky in trying to do that. The worst of them has to be the battery you find on a floating box in the sewer. Just what the fuck is this doing here and why? I'll tell you why. It is a systematic issue of drip feeding batteries so they pop up in retarded places. They needed X amount in Y areas, and so it wasn't really about putting them in places that made sense. It was more about putting them in places where players would likely be running lower. So guys, what do you think about this as an idea? I would love being told that you have one continuous source of battery for the camera. To be told at the beginning of the game that you need to be extremely careful with the battery and that it will last for about 1.5 hours of in-game time. And have one area in the game where you can get a full recharge, like a security room, plug it into a socket and fade to black only to move into another section of the game. This is one of the many ways you could fix their system while introducing a more grounding difficulty, but alas, that would fundamentally change the game. And besides, I think it would just be a cool mode if nothing else. There are a hell of a lot of ideas you could have about these sorts of things, but the system that is currently in place raises many natural questions, and I feel they really didn't have to have it be that way. But so be it. They were rather kind with the amount of batteries, though. I found it interesting that there were so many to collect in the opening area of the game. Not to mention, nearing the end of the game, you're given 4 batteries in the fuse puzzle section. So the question becomes, were there too many batteries? Not enough batteries? Let's ask the reviewers.
Oh, a battery! How lucky am I? Oh, another battery! Oh, another battery! What? Another battery?
And even on normal difficulty, if you're not careful, you can run out of battery, which spells disaster.
We never had much trouble keeping stock of batteries.
There is a lack of batteries.
Thankfully, on the easier difficulties of the game, batteries aren't too hard to find.
Batteries come few and far between in this game.
Eventually, however, batteries become so commonplace that some of the tension is diminished.
As running out of juice in a particularly dark area forced me to have to reload a prior save file and replay a good chunk of a level.
The IGN guy said he had to restart a checkpoint because he used too many batteries. Of course, that was IGN. But yes, you can see there is no answer to that question. It is entirely down to the player. Upon my playthrough of the game, I had used the camera at this point to make visible any sections I had genuine difficulty seeing. And I used it to see, like, spectacles a little bit better in night vision. This left me with 6 batteries at this juncture in the game. Replaying it for the first time in a while, being conservative and searchy, resulted in an all-time low of batteries at 4 out of 10, which I think is pretty solid. On a subsequent playthrough trying to beat the game without using many batteries, I was mostly at 10 from the moment I had found that amount. For me, the amount they use is absolutely fine, and I feel like only the people who are wasting their batteries really are going to be running out. Now, a natural positive of all this is that once you realize you need to be careful with your light source, you will turn off your night vision where possible. This can give you a brief selection of gameplay akin to that of Cry of Fear when you have flashes of light in what is a terrifying and jump-scare-ridden world. This naturally benefits the usage of lighting, and can honestly be terrifying, and it's not even scripted. Now, when you do run out of battery, you'll not find yourself without night vision. You can, however, have it limited. Limited in that you will have a lot less in the dark, so players can still progress, but they can't have a strong advantage. This is a strong compromise of punishment versus reward, and I really like it. The only issue for me is that sometimes it doesn't make a lick of difference. As you can see in this sequence, that without battery it's a pretty strong amount of vision, and with the battery full it gives you a slight benefit of seeing slightly more of the chair. There are some areas where the difference is indistinguishable, however. Like seriously folks, spot the difference in these two panes. One is night vision without the battery reloaded, and one is with it reloaded. Now, this is kind of pretty much just strong evidence that the night vision at standard is actually overpowered. I think it backs the point even more that I was spending much of my time in Outlast making strong use of the dimmed night vision, that there were sections where that actual mode was extremely viable. Personally, I would have loved the option to cycle through normal vision, night vision, and battery-boosted night vision, but I know that this as a quirk is not actually intended, so it makes for very exploitable situations. This is exemplified by the fact that the battery-powered night vision doesn't really always provide more light. Is that a screw-up? Because honestly, many players will find themselves wasting batteries without realizing they didn't need to. This is a result, by the way, of trying to punish players but not wanting to go all the way. Amnesia mediated it by having a world around you light up as if you're adjusting your eyes to the darkness, but it was always clear-cut as a lesser way of viewing the world. Besides, there is more than just that to the batteries. If you die with any percentage of battery remaining in your charge, then it will reset to full, regardless of what it was when you hit that checkpoint. You die and receive what is essentially a battery for free as long as you're away from where the checkpoints are. This is extremely exploitable. It's like farming batteries. You literally don't need to spend any of your batteries as long as when a certain sequence has begun, you just die, and then presto, you have all of it back. This is why I laughed so hard at the IGN guy. He only needed to die and his battery would have been refilled, but he obviously didn't know that, and who knows how far back he went. Another one of those sorts of little exploits is that your camera starts to fizzle once you've dropped it, and you can fix the screen by flipping it to night vision and back, revealing it to be some sort of annoying tick on a timer that adds to the immersion, but then jarringly breaks once you figure that out. It can also be fixed by walking through a bloody door. The sequence in which there is little to no light aside from the lighting in the background is almost impossible for a new player without light, and I think that restoring the battery upon death is likely for this particular sequence. The problem for me is that I think anyone going through this bit without battery is going to find it really frustrating because you can't see anything even with basic night vision. Less about the scares, more about the boredom. Not too much of an issue, I suppose. The one small thing I did appreciate was that they kept the exact same amount of battery from when you drop the camera in the game to when you find it again. Nice touch. But overall, yes, it is a cool and interesting new system, one that has so much room for improvement and further mechanical depth. I feel like they had the idea and just ran with it from the opening without thinking about how they could improve it, and that is unfortunate. It worked as a system for limitation, and it wasn't extremely comforting. I mean, even when the game was in complete darkness, having the night vision doesn't make you safe. Anyway, let's take another stab at responding to our good friend Noah, shall we?
It's to the original Outlast's credit that it can excise fight and still find 6 hours of ways to play around with flight. It's thoughtful about how to create many modes of evasion, using level design to continually switch up the level of tension and the pace of exploration.
Is that right? I found that everything is mostly the same, and as I said previously, Outlast employs a tutorial that almost summarizes every form of running in the game subsequently. The peak of the whole chase stuff is in the sequence right before Traeger, and it isn't very special considering you only have one way to go, and every time you hit a wall you simply click mouse 1 and then continue. Alternatively, you've hit a dead end and you die. Trial and error. This is very much limited gameplay and very few modes of evasion with a strong lack of level design to match. Traeger is the only area that really showed a lot of effort in terms of player choices, but I haven't really done enough to prove that yet, so perhaps by next part. The part about changing up the level of tension and pace of exploration interests me, since it sounds like buzzwords, and without any evidence or explanation, that's what it will remain. The game goes from a set piece to another set piece, with the music almost always dictating the events unfolding. You will be a slow-paced explorer, then a sprinting victim. There's not much in between, nor is there any meaningful transition between the two. I feel that I have certainly proven that, but go on.
There's the long periods of quiet, especially towards the beginning, winding mazes of concrete and wood. There are sequences where you're being chased by a whole host of murderous inmates, screaming and clamoring for meat while you frantically run in the opposite direction, jumping over fallen lockers and dead bodies.
There are long periods of quiet towards the beginning. Not really. The longest stretch is about 5 minutes, since even the fans of this game proclaim that it is a non-stop action and terror thriller, which I pretty much agree with. Jumping over fallen lockers and dead bodies. Now, this is where I'm starting to spot that Noah is less a game critic and more of a writer. He accentuates and blooms his writing to be more evocative of the experience, whether or not the facts line up. I don't think you can even be tripped up by a body in the game, meaning you certainly don't jump over them, nor do I remember a single locker to jump over. There are these weird corridor blockages that I honestly have no idea what they're doing there, but the experience you're describing reminds me of the trailer, which is also a bit of an exaggeration. In reality, you will find yourself bursting through doors and vaulting some obstacles while you look for lockers to hide in. Is that good? Well, I'm not trying to discern that. What I'm more interested in is your understanding, Noah. I don't know where you've gotten this scenario from.
There are sequences where you're being stalked through total darkness, moving room to room in the baleful and dim glow of your camcorder's night vision mode, while listening to the ragged in-and-out breaths of something extremely huge and extremely close. You'll flip-flop from one sort of disgusting and dangerous situation to another at a wonderfully fast-paced clip, from frying pan to fire and beyond.
So now it's a consistently fast-paced game, going from danger to danger? That I can agree with, but it doesn't line up with the other thing you said. Also, you are outright saying that the gameplay changes up a lot in Outlast, despite the majority of criticism will often lead to people saying that the game is repetitive. And after the work I put in to try and prove that the gameplay only gets iterative and repetitive past Traeger, I'm going to have to say that you're wrong on this, and I'm starting to see that you have a romanticized version of Outlast in your head. Which is fine, but your video is called Outlast 1 and 2 Gamifying Found Footage, which so far has been kind of nonsense. Nevertheless, I will see you for more of your analysis another time. I can't focus too hard or I might, you know, piss everybody off in the comment section. Speaking of which, thanks ever so much for watching, folks. Next time we will be delving heavily into graphics to sort of put a cork in the whole subject of how the game looks. Until then, I will see you next time.